Welcome to the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Lamson. If this is your first time listening or your 50th time listening, this is what to expect on this episode. We dive into the concepts of developing your leadership toolbox. Why do you need this? You need this in any situation to help manage, lead, and control, and ultimately win. How do you do that? You can't use the same form of leadership in everything you do. So every episode, we dive into my leadership philosophy. We dive into the story and the background of the person we're talking to. And we also dive into some leadership traits I have accrued throughout the years. And then we also follow it up with a book review at the end. So you're getting a wide range of leadership topics and traits that you can add to your kit. So without further ado, let's go into the recap of this episode. And afterwards, if you love it, like it, share it, follow it, give us some feedback, because we're only just getting started. On today's episode, we go a little non-standard. I don't follow my script if you're used to it from past episodes because we were just on a tighter schedule. So myself and William Davis, the guest for today, are going to jump straight into just some leadership traits. We are going to discuss them from his side. He works more on the CEO business side of the house and now has transitioned to a leadership expert for future companies. He also has a book, How to Lead Without Just Managing, and we discuss that as well. But what I love about this discussion is we just dive straight into it, both from the military side and the civilian side, and how they both interact on leadership. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any questions, please save, share, like, or follow. And as always, provide some feedback and continue to build that leadership belt. Welcome back, everybody, I would say this is a non-standard episode. I'm Manny with William, and we were just talking before with the limited time cap we have. It won't be the normal script as I would have, but a couple things will come out of this episode. One, we will have continuing episodes on some of the questions he dives into on the leadership side because there are a lot. And so what we're going to do today is I will let him introduce himself really quick, and then we're going to cover 3 important questions that I was able to choose from his repertoire, and we will hit them with any added inputs, and then it'll be about a 30-minute episode. So for you guys listening, it'll be great to really just get some good leadership nuggets. It'll just be one of those hitters where you're just listening and you get some notes and you continue on with your day. And then we will continue these on later on down the road. So without further ado, William, thank you for joining. And sir, with a quick little intro for everybody.
Thank you, Manny. I appreciate it. It's been something I've been looking forward to ever since we first started talking about this. I am William Davis. I am just retired from my corporate career after about 38 to 40 years, depending whether you count college or not. But I've been with 3 different companies in Fortune 500 across that career and held various senior leadership positions, and decided I wanted to pursue this based upon what I would say challenges, I think, is a fair assessment in leadership. And again, you go back to various surveys that are done where anybody from 70 to 80% of folks say, hey, we've got a leadership problem, leadership crisis in corporate America. And so one of the things that I wanted to do, because I feel like, and folks who worked for me felt like, that we had a very successful formula, is I wanted to share that. As I kind of wind down my career, I wanted to give back to the newer generation and help them understand, hey guys, you need to look at leadership in a little bit different manner than what you're taught in the corporate world.
Man, that's cool. I guess if you want to cover maybe, so like you've moved on to the leadership speaking, leadership covering. Yes. How did you come about, I guess, that journey to leave and then sort of start again?
Well, the movement out of corporate America was really because I got just sick of the standard nonsense that you dealt with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, when I started in corporate America in 1983, first early in college, I worked for a bank all through college, and leadership and mentorship was a very different process than it is now. And yeah, you focused on the bottom line, but it was also a matter of succession planning and how do we continue to generate new leaders, new generation of leaders, and improve on what we've had in the past. So as I've gotten older, and I turned 60 last year, uh, it's just not it's not the same.
Yeah.
And part of it is because we focus so much on uh, impersonal relationships, and part of that's pandemic, right? We had that situation where everybody had to work at home, but I saw it flipping prior to that. We became a very impersonal relationship type society. And when you started talking about, succession planning and helping people grow, it became more about, all right, as long as it doesn't hurt me. I'll
Yeah.
do what I can as long as it doesn't affect me in a negative manner. And that's not the approach. That you win. I've always had the philosophy: you win together, you lose together, right? And I can't win if my team doesn't win, and I can't lose, if I have a team that is built of winners that are, continuing to grow and continuing to work together and have that common effort. I always look at it from the perspective of sports. The ultimate goal is what? Winning, but it's also making sure you don't have any injuries, right? You want to make sure you take care of your people. Same thing in the corporate world. You want to win and you want to do well, but you want to make sure that you're bringing your people along and they're able to gain from it.
Yeah, I love this because one, I've never dealt with the corporate world, being in the military. So to hear, and I'm always very curious on how leadership is developed outside of the military, being so biased and locked into the military world where we have courses and things like that. And so sometimes I'll have civilians or people that don't have any military experience, and I'll ask them like, "Hey, what does your job provide? Do they give you leadership like seminars or things like that?"
Right.
And I think one of the biggest things you covered was relationships matter, and in person, really will create that next level team.
Right. Well, yeah, and to your question about, how did we develop out in the corporate world? We don't well. We don't do it well. We have leadership training, but it's more focused on management, right? And
Yeah.
there's a difference between being a leader and being a manager. There's a difference between being a leader and being a boss.
Yeah.
And management is more about getting the functions done. We're checking off what we need to
Yeah.
do, whether it be an order or process or whatever. Leadership is, about self awareness and about the ability to be empathetic, dealing with people. The one thing, you go back to some of the challenges that we're having now in the corporate world where folks that had been told to, hey, you got to work remotely because of the pandemic, now are being told you got to come back to the office. Well, then that's fine, and understand, the corporate environment does what it feels like it needs to do to be successful. But I would look at two things when we're making that decision. First, we had a great amount of success over the last 4 years with people working remotely. I don't know of any corporation who dramatically was off in their numbers or success factors based on that. But two, when we asked people to work from home, especially if they had children, it changed the whole dynamic of their life. They had children that now I had to worry about being at home when I worked at home during the summer. How do I handle that? And so over that 4 years, they totally changed their structure of life and how they dealt with their family to accommodate this work from home environment. And now when you're saying, hey, you've got to come back to the office, I've got a whole new dynamic that I've got to adjust to. Now, what do I do with my children after school? Instead of me being at home and feeling comfortable that they were going to be here and I didn't have to worry about a nanny or a babysitter or after school care or whatever, now I've got all of these things that I've got to worry about. And the other part that I try to emphasize to folks is, you know, regardless of what side of the aisle politically you're on, the economy's not been great the last 4 years since the pandemic hit. So now if I'm asking these people to come back into the office and now they've got expenses that they didn't have, but I've only been getting 1 or 2% pay increases while inflation has been 6, 7, 8%. There's a financial dynamic there that is very difficult for people to adjust to. And I've got to be able to help them. I've got to be able to understand that this is a real life situation that is affecting these people, and I've got to be able to help them accommodate it.
Yeah, man, that's a lot. It is. It is a lot because in the military we see, we did a little bit of telework, but for
Yeah,
most part, a lot of jobs had to, abide by the rules that were put in to still get the job done. And so we
yep,
didn't lose that big connection that I think the corporate world lost, where there were a lot of people saying, I don't need to come in. I'll find a new job,
right,
because there were probably a lot of jobs that were still offering that telework option when they saw it was a valuable option, and
right,
they can get more people to help out. And
right.
so that's a huge shift. And and it's been, man, it's crazy to think it's already been 4 or 5 years going through it, but I still think we're going to see the leadership bubble and, struggles the next 5 to 7 years as well. Cause
Oh, yeah,
it's a continuation thing with people who were in college now getting into the corporate world, or people who were young in their corporate world at that time, having to shift their whole new leadership approach,
yep,
to sort of go backwards in how we
yep,
led.
yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 1,000%. You're absolutely right. And you think about it, you got a 5, 6, 7 years worth of college graduates that have come into the
Hmm.
workforce that have never had that face-to-face relationship that
Yeah.
now they're
Oh
going to
yeah.
have
That's
to start
crazy.
learning, and it is a difficult challenge.
Yeah. And then for some just leaders or corporate managers, that's a lot of time they don't have to really teach somebody how to be a leader in person,
Yeah,
when they hire
yeah,
them. They can't sacrifice that time, so they're going to either look for somebody else or skip maybe that job per se title, and
yeah,
then now they're filling gaps with less people and to get the job done.
yeah. That's right.
Well, let's dive into a couple of these questions. We're just going to jump straight into it, everybody. So the way this worked is I was provided some topics and areas you focus on, and man, there were a lot. But we picked three today, and we'll just go with them and see how much time we have left. And the first one I have was, some of these I chose for the military listeners because it'll apply in both worlds as well.
Right.
So, how do you identify leadership in potential employees, or in my case, like military airmen that are younger? What do they? What would a leader look for in potential leaders?
The first thing I've always looked for is, are they able to build relationships with others? Are they able to have that personal relationship? One of the things that I'm afraid that we have gotten away from is we look at our people, regardless what industry or military or whatever, as numbers, as digits, as widgets,
Hmm.
whatever you want to
Yeah.
call them. And again, I go back to what we were talking about a minute ago. These are real people with real lives, real emotions, real challenges, real things they have to deal with on a day to day basis. And I need to be able to connect with them and understand that, hey, they've got things going on with their lives. Part of that is self awareness, empathy. How, can I read the room? Am I able to manage my emotions and respond to the needs of others? So, those are things that I'm not going to say they can't be taught, but there's a lot more natural ability that goes into that than, hey, this is how work with others.
Yeah, and so for those that have listened before, we know that I have my four leadership philosophies, and that ties directly into number three: build relationships based off trust and care.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about just building relationships right away as a way for somebody to see who's a potential leader, is it's just a great one, because in the military we talk about it all the time. If you get to know your people, you build trust, you're creating empathy, or you have empathy for them, and
Mhm.
it allows those people to just continue to focus on the mission.
Yeah. For me, it's always been, it starts with me, right? It starts with me creating that kind of correct relationship with my people and getting to know them. I'm able to see, how do they handle tough conversations? How do they handle stress? How do they handle dealing with colleagues or, assignments that are given to them? One of the things that I've always done whenever I come in and take over a new team is I deal with each person individually, not trying to create the relationship in the same manner with every one of them. And I'll give you
Yep.
an example. Um, I had a young man who worked for me, loved golf. And so how did we start creating the relationship? Well, we went golfing, you know, and I've been criticized saying, oh, well, that's not work. Well, yeah, it is. As me as a leader, part of my job is, yes, to make sure things get done and it gets done correctly. but also is to make sure that I have the right people in place and that they're doing the right job and they're handling the situations they need to handle correctly. And, on the golf course, we talked about a ton of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to know him, got to know what was going on with his life. Um, and I know some people will say, well, you got to be careful with that, how close you get in that relationship. And I agree with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people that have worked for me through the course of the last 40 years that I'm still good friends with now, even today, and I care about them, right? And so I think that's the second piece of it. I have to build that relationship, and they have to see that that relationship is genuine.
Yeah.
It's not just words, right? While I may not get involved in the details of the things that are going wrong with their life, I can be empathetic, right? I can understand that they have factors going on that are going to affect what they do and how they do it. And part of my job is to help manage them through that, to make sure that it doesn't become a roadblock to them or negatively affect the team. The other thing I do is I look at the relationship that they have with their family, because to me, when I see a leader or someone I'm looking at being a leader, how they relate with their family, that's the real person. To me, that's the real person. That's the real attitude. That's the real emotional intellect of that person. And so I try to get in a situation, whether we have a group gathering, where the families come together, and it helps me understand that person a little bit better.
Yeah, and I love the start with me. That sort of ties directly into, I say, my first leadership philosophy: lead by example in all you do, because you have to lead by example to get them in. And the start with me was interesting because we hear a lot about start with why, right, from Simon Sinek. And so for you to add the me, it really hits hard, because we set the bar. We lead by example. We set the standard, and so if I want somebody to be a great leader, like, you just have to do that as well. And so that was really cool. And then one of the things you talked about when you said, like, you get in their comfort zone, that's sort of like what I like to do. Is for me in the military, since we PT a lot of exercise, I will exercise with airmen outside of work to get to know them outside of their workplace, and then you understand how they work and what they can do.
Yeah, and they understand that relationship we're building is genuine, right?
Yeah.
If I keep it within the confines of the walls of the corporation, it's hard for people to really trust you, because it's like, okay, is this a work relationship, or is this person really trying to get to know me, trying to help me, trying to work with me? I love what you were talking about, starting with the me, is the fact that we have children. How do we train our children? We hope that they learn by the example that I present to them, right? And that it's the right example. And I think, those are both situations that, sorry, my phone rang. Situations that, that we can, help them learn from, and then they are on the right path.
Yeah, I don't think you understand leading by example until you have kids, because
that's right. That's
you
exactly
can tell
right.
them everything to do in the world, but they will not do it unless they see you do it.
That's right. I mean, and in this same thing in the corporate world, the same in the military world. You say all you want, but people watch what you do, and then that's what they emulate.
Exactly. Let's dive into the second one. How can someone lead effectively without an official leadership title, which I really love, because the military, for the younger airmen that are looking to get ahead, sometimes they're not in. Obviously, we have titles in the military that, will put you in a leadership position, like a supervisor or an NCO. But for those that are younger and wanting to lead, sometimes they're nervous because they're not officially in a leadership role. So they sort of sit back and they continue to be a follower. So how can somebody take that next step?
Well, I think first of all is you have to determine in your own mind, do I want to be this? And if I want to be that, then I emulate folks that I respect and I view as leaders. And I start emulating the characteristics that they have. But again, you have to want to be a leader, and you have to want to be a leader for the right reasons. It's not for the power trip. It's not for the money. It's not for anything other than I want to help people be better. And so what I've always encouraged people is that be yourself. And, at some point that title will come, but that does not affect whether people that you're working with, again, if you go back to are they genuine? Are they sincere? People will see that, and they will naturally gravitate to you as someone they look to in times of stress, in times of challenges, when questions need to be answered that they are, having trouble with. They'll naturally go to you. I had a young lady that worked for me. Well, she wasn't even an employee. I mean, she was a consultant originally, and she was confident, but she was caring. She was very nurturing in how she dealt with people, and people just naturally gravitated to her. And so when I had an opening on my team, boy, that's the first person I went and grabbed, because she was the kind of person that I knew that was going to make the team successful.
Man, just to hear you say you have to want it is a huge. It's shocking, but it's not, because I just love the way you phrase that, especially in the military, where airmen will know they have to become a leader soon. And so they're sort of expecting it to happen to them. But when they don't want it, they're not man, it doesn't mean as much. And so that's a great question I'm going to start asking, is when somebody's like, hey, Manny, like, how do I just, get like this award we call it below the zone, where you're rewarded for doing extra work. And I'm just gonna be like, do you want it? Are you just going through the motions day to day to get the job done?
Yeah, absolutely. Because leadership, Manny, and you've seen this all through your career, leadership is a constant process of improvement, right? You as a leader constantly learn, you constantly adapt, and you constantly drive yourself to be better for the people that you're leading.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've learned in my leadership career, especially these last like 5 years, where I've really dove into myself as a leader and becoming a better leader, is one, it never stops. You never like hit this bar that's like, congrats, you're a leader. You can stop everything you're doing.
Yeah.
You have made it. And then two, you mentioned it earlier, I want to re-hit it, is it changes with everybody around you.
Yep.
That was one of the biggest, like, not humbling, but almost scary moments when I was really becoming a better leader, was one leadership style is not the same for everybody. And so that is probably one of the biggest the toxic leadership things I've seen. Even though it's not toxic, if that leader is very good at one leadership style, they sort of stick to it and they think everybody has to mold to that, when it's the other way around.
I call it lazy leadership. It's a lazy leadership style, because it's a mindset of I've plateaued. Right. I've reached a point to where my style is the way, and that's not the case. Your style only is successful if it's adaptable to everybody that you're leading.
Yeah.
And can be successful. Now, that doesn't mean everybody that I'm leading is going to be successful, right? Because they got to play their part.
Yeah.
But I have to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to fulfill my side of it.
Yeah. And I think for young leaders, that's hard, because they may only have like one, I call it leadership toolbox, right? So they may only have one tool in their leadership toolbox to use, which is fine, but they need to know they need to know to continue to build their leadership style. That's the toughest thing I've seen in younger leaders when they're taught leadership, is they're usually taught one way to lead. And so they hold on to that as the only way to lead. And it only gets them so far.
Yeah, and it may only work for one area, right? I mean, if you're in operations of a bank, well, because of the static transactions and the static functions that you do, that style might work. But then as you move on into another area, it doesn't work, because everything changes.
Yeah. All right. So for the third question was, what strategies can organizations use to identify, and I highlighted nurture, because that's one we can dive into a little bit later, but for future leaders. So once they see it, that they want to keep it, what can they do?
Well, I think one of the things is that they've got to make sure that they are offering the right kind of leadership. And I don't want to say training, but they're offering the right kind of leadership classes. right? So let's look beyond just the function responsibilities, and let's look at, the empathy. Do you have empathy? What is empathy? How do you manage empathy? uh, do you have the communication skills, right? And again, that's a huge thing that you really can improve on. But your communication skills have to always be that the person you're dealing with feels like that you are on their side. Even if I'm having a tough conversation with them, I'm there for you. I'm on your side. I want you to succeed. And there are some folks that just can't have that conversation because they just, I don't know if they're just not empathetic enough, or if they truly don't feel and are truly genuine in their concern. Um, but then so the management or leadership training, the communication skills, and then I think when you really get down to it, you have to make sure that you are understanding the people that you are looking at being a leader, their behavioral, if you want to call it behavioral assessments, the various tests that you can do to try to determine what type of personality someone is.
Yeah.
That's part of it, and will give you an indication of that person. But I think between their behavioral track record, if you will, and then their actual work track record, right? Those two things can really help you focus in on, is this person a leadership candidate or not?
Yeah, I think some of the things you alluded to, and when I think of nurture, I think of continuing to grow.
Yep.
And so one of the ways we continue to grow, especially in the flying community in the military, is we call it debrief, or another way to provide feedback after, because leaders, they need to know sort of how they're leading, right? And so it means a lot. And I've seen a lot better leaders when they are told or debrief, like, hey, here's what I'm seeing you do. Here's some ways you can fix it. Here's some ways you can adjust it. Now go out there and do it. And then that's a great way to nurture leadership, is, are you providing them the tools to maybe fix some areas they don't know they have wrong, or they're leading poorly, to get better at, and then continue to grow?
It's that 360 assessment, right? Or 360 feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
I, as your leader, am going to give you feedback. It's fair game that you're going to give me feedback, because I'm not perfect. And if I'm really being the leader that I should be, I again want to improve. And if you have, things that you see that I could do better, and it may not even be what affects you. It may be what you see affects the rest of the team or another individual on the team. I need to be able to take that and analyze it and say, okay, they're right. I need to make these changes. I think the other thing that we can do is don't throw people into the big lake of leadership, right? Give them smaller opportunities to get comfortable, to get acclimated, and to prove themselves, successful, and then transition them into something a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think that ties directly to what we talked about earlier, was you have to know them.
Yep.
You have to have a relationship with them to know what lake you can throw them into, per se.
Yep.
If you don't know that, you might toss them in a lake they can't swim in, or maybe too small of a lake where they needed a bigger lake to jump into. And so that ties directly into, start with me. Have I built relationships with those people below me to understand who is right for what role?
Yep.
And if so, do the people I'm putting in those roles know why they're in that role? Because sometimes you'll put somebody in a role and they may not know why, so they're either going to get upset or they're going to think that it's overwhelming.
Yep.
And one thing I've also learned in my career, which I always laugh at my naiveness at the time, but sometimes when a leader is giving you a situation to lead in that seems stressful for you or out of your comfort zone, it's because they know you can handle a challenge.
Right.
And so sometimes when I was given tasks in the past, I was like, man, why did my boss tell me to do this? Like, I don't think I can do it, or it's not in my wheelhouse, or I haven't trained for it. But I sort of know, I should have known at the time that he has built a relationship with me to know, one, maybe I needed to move on, or I needed to grow. And so that's a huge thing.
Yeah, and it never hurts for me to come to you and say, hey, you know what, you're getting this because I know you can do it. Give that
Yeah,
recognition and that support that,
appreciation is
hey, you
huge.
betcha.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
absolutely, absolutely.
That
I
is
mean,
another, yeah.
again, it goes back to we've got to get past the thought process that the people that work for us are just
Mhm.
digits, numbers,
Yeah.
whatever. They're human beings and they want validation. They want, the opportunities and they want the empathy, because there are things sometimes that go wrong.
That's one of the most rewarding leadership traits for any leader is just uh, showing appreciation to
Oh, yeah.
somebody. And
Yeah.
I joke about it all the time because in the military, when you do, people think you're like this extraordinary person for praising somebody. But I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just being a human, you know?
You
Like,
bet. You betcha.
I will understand when I see somebody maybe in the big shop perspective, some people may not think it as that person going above and beyond, but if I just appreciate them for showing up on time or getting to the meeting on time or setting up the PowerPoint or taking out the garbage or all those little things where it just matters, like even like a
Mm.
high five,
Yep.
or just tiny appreciation.
Yep. Yep. Well, and you asked me early, what kind of set the foundation for my leadership style. It's the golden rule, right? Just
Yeah,
do
yeah,
unto others that, how you would like for them to treat you, right?
yeah.
And you don't waver from that, even if they're not appreciative of it, even if they treat you poorly, because
Hmm.
of that doesn't skew you, that doesn't change who you are. You continue with that philosophy and mentality and style, and people will understand you're genuine, and you're going to have more people that gravitate and accept that than people that reject it.
Yeah, and I really think the generations now need more appreciation
I agree.
because they were raised in a generation that didn't get it as much. Like I look at where my parents raised me, and there's no fault to them, but they just grew up in a generation where praise just wasn't given as much. It was more of the do as you're told. And so that's just where I think it's that Generation Z through the Generation X. The '80s to the 2000s babies
Yeah.
that we grew up with parents who were working, 6 to 6, and we came home and there wasn't that. How was school? Was it amazing? Good job. You're doing great. It was, you just kept going. And so now we're seeing them grow up where they have seen appreciation and they really like it. They enjoy
Yeah.
it. And it's one of those gaps that some leaders to shift from, especially for those that were leading early, on. Now they have to change the way they do that.
Well, and as great as technology advancements have been in the last 30 years, we have raised a generation of children who have been raised by it as opposed to being
Yeah,
raised by their parents.
exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so what do they learn? Do they learn those interpersonal skills that we've been spending so much of this conversation talking about?
Hmm.
No, they're not going to get the
No.
interpersonal skills on phone, and they're certainly not going to get them on TikTok and
Yeah.
Instagram and Facebook and things like that. They get a lot of things that they, you hope they don't retain. Um, and so, when I was growing up as a kid, I grew up on a farm, and my, after school and particularly during the summer, my interaction was one on one with my dad, working. And he trained me, he nurtured me. He wasn't necessarily the softest man on the planet, right? He had a temper, but I knew that he was genuine and he
Yeah.
cared for me and was trying to teach me things that he knew would be great life skills for me down the road. And I think we've just missed that with this
Yeah.
electronic age, and to the point where what people think our needs are really wants, right? And so then they go after whatever it must they have to do, working two, three jobs in order to attain that. We need to
Yeah.
step back and realize our children's and the raising of them, the nurturing of them, is much more important than any of the materialistic gains that we'll ever get in this world.
Yeah. And I think one thing to look at too is while we may not have the time now to build relationships on the farm, or changing
Yeah,
tires or working on cars because the way technology is, there are still areas where you can bridge that gap. For
you
me, I
betcha.
use exercise with my kids as one of those
Yep,
areas where I can give them sort of what my dad and your dad gave you was
yep,
working in the yard or mowing the lawn, those like more manual labor bonding experiences we had with our dads. But now I need to change that because one, I don't do them as much, and it's all like, technology change, where I don't have to spend 5 hours mowing the lawn anymore with my son. It's just like I can do a lot quicker. And so I need to find those areas where I can bridge that gap of the bondness that we have. And one has been exercise, going on walks, and sometimes it's just like, it's crazy to say, just going outside, it's just like, just let them go jump on a trampoline or go play. That's just some of those little areas. And now when I transition out of leadership, it's going to be maybe, how do I build those relationships in an office outside of technology?
Right. Yeah, and I think, again, as we talk about leadership, that's part of my responsibility is to help you ensure that you've got the time to have that work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
There are times, obviously, where you have to work 60, 70 hours in a week because of what's going on. But I have to make sure that I'm giving you the opportunities that you have the majority of your weekends, the majority of your nights to spend with your family or whatever. One of the things that my wife and I did, because when I first started in my career, I was traveling 75% of the time, and I was gone Sunday through Friday night. And what we always ensured was Saturday was family day. Didn't matter what else was going on, it was family day. When we went on vacations, it's important for us to have had alone time, but we made sure that our kids were with us because we wanted them to ensure that, they understood, hey, you're part of this family, you're important, and mom and dad are always here for you. And so I think as a leader, you've got to make sure your people have that same opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And yes, there's going to be times when that may not be possible, but you've got to make sure that it is possible the majority of the time, and it's the rule, not the exception.
Yeah, and one of the ways I've seen that on the military side is, sometimes there's that leadership philosophy, the longer I work, the harder I work, which I think it's not true. I can be a very effective leader in 3 hours of work, honestly, and I've proved it in some jobs. We were talking about the balancing, and I think what some leaders have to do is they need to show it on their end as well. I just can't tell somebody, hey, go enjoy time with your family if they see me not. But then it also comes down to, and I was trying to tie it to, what was I going to say? Oh, it's right onto my tongue. The time. In the military, the time is always going to be asked of you if you give it to them.
That's right.
If I'm sitting around, the military will take your time. That's just the way it is. It's a 24/7 job. We never know what's going to happen. And so I have a lot of people that are like, Manny, how do I get the time? I'm like, you have to physically make the time for yourself. You need to be adamant on telling me or those around you, like, I have this time to myself for my family. And then I always tell people, take the time, and the military gives it to you, because it's never going to tell you have time off.
Right.
You need to tell it, like, hey, I don't have anything to do today in my schedule for these 3 hours. I'm going to go do this for me. And usually when you do that, nobody's going to get mad at you. They're not going to be like, no, you can't. If you are good at your schedule, you're good at your habits and routine, you understand where that time's coming from, you can go to your boss, like, hey, sir, I am going to get off at 4 today and go hang out with my family from 4 to 7. Maybe I'll check my emails after, just in case there's something I missed. And if they go, he understands that, he gave me a reason and a solution to it, perfect.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 1,000%. That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. You have to, even though leaders need to make sure that they're helping you, you've got to take that ownership and management of your own time.
Yep. Was there anything crazy you wanted to cover with these remaining minutes, or anything you wanted to say for anybody out there? We're at 37 minutes. I don't want to go too far, and I really do think this is an opportunity for us later to cover more questions, and it's just,
Yeah. I just have really enjoyed this. I've listened to some of your other podcasts from previous before this, and have really enjoyed your conversations with folks. I wrote a book that is.
Okay, I was going to ask. I didn't see it in the notes, and usually the people I get on the show that we talk about from the way we connect have, and so I was going to ask. What do you got?
So I just wrote a book. It's on Amazon, and I'll send you. I can't remember the title, and that's great, right? I can't remember the title of my own book, but it's the first in a series. It's called the Leadership Blueprint series, and it's available on Amazon. But the first book talks specifically about what is the difference between a leader, manager, and a boss. And
Nice.
then the remaining books, the next one is about relationships. How do you build those relationships? What's important? How? And I give examples, and I do that in the keynotes and the workshops that I do.
Okay.
They'll ask me for a subject, and I'll try to hit some of the subjects, but I'll blow out more on the one area that they really want. But that's what I'm going to do in this series. We're going to talk about relationships in the second book. We're going to talk about empathy in the third book,
Nice.
and I'll surprise you with where we go from there.
Perfect. Yeah, I will get that info for you. And for those listening, I always put show notes in Spotify. Spotify is always tricky with the show notes stuff, but it's there. And then if there's, obviously I will put like LinkedIn and other ways people to connect to you as well, because I just think that's a huge asset you're providing.
Yeah, and it's also on my website. So if they go to williamcdavis.net, there's a books tab. They can go to it, and it links them to Amazon.
Nice.
Manny, I appreciate it, man. I had a lot of fun. This has been great.
Yeah, and it's 30 minutes goes by so quick. And
It
so when I
does.
saw like the window, I was like, man, it's going to be an effective 30 minutes. That's for sure.
Great.